If you like our videos, please like, comments, share, subscribe. Hashtag the tour.
What's up, YouTubers? My name is Justin, and I'd like to talk today about driving for companies like DoorDash, GrubHub, UberEats, all the mom and pop establishments of that type out there. First, I want to share a little bit of my history in the business. I first started doing that line of work, independent delivery contractor, about 6 years ago. I started in late 2013. Did it for about 6 months, took a little break, did it for like a year and a half, and all of which was in Alabama, and then moved to Iowa and started out in Iowa with a small, mom and pop type company, and then moved on to GrubHub, UberEats, and DoorDash. So let's talk first about mom and pop establishments. I've worked for a few. The first one I ever worked for was called Doorstep Delivery. They were a franchise in Birmingham, Alabama, and were ran by the Sides family. I believe Doorstep became Iron City Delivery, I think is what they renamed it. Still ran by the same people. When I started at Doorstep Delivery, they were brand new, had only been in the market for about 2 weeks. Business was slow. There were nights that before expenses, I didn't clear minimum wage. Before taxes, I didn't clear minimum wage. So after tax and expense, clearing minimum wage was impossible to do the majority of the time there. When you did have a good day, it was like maybe a $10 an hour, $8 to $10 an hour kind of thing. They were terrible to work for. They had a piss poor attitude when it came to taking care of their drivers. They expected you to be happy that you were driving for a loss. You constantly got told you can't think about it that way. Well, that was really the way that they didn't want you to think about it, because they don't want their people to realize that they were being ripped off. They were being taken advantage of. You get this promise of you're going to run your own business, and then you get into it, and depending on who you work for, it might not be a viable thing. So taking into consideration the type of company and the size of the company that you work for is extremely important in this line of work. The population of the area that you live in is extremely important. One of the companies that I worked for, it was the first one I worked for in Iowa. It was called Food Dudes Delivery. He had told me one time that on any given day, the most you could hope to get in orders was about 10% of the population. And then of that 10%, only about 1% are going to be frequent orderers. People that order every day or at least every week, people that you see all the time. And you're going to see in this business, if you decide to do it, that you're going to see some people over and over and over, especially if you're in a small town. I've driven in 3 different sizes of market. Birmingham, Alabama was the first. Given the area, the amount of area that they covered, probably had a population of, I'm guessing like 400,000 to 800,000. Jefferson County has 1 million, and they were in Birmingham, Hoover, Vestavia, Mountain Brook. Birmingham alone has a population of better than, I think, 500,000. But Alabama is, when I was there, at least, in my view, this was been about 4 years ago now. It was terrible. The second company that I worked for in Alabama was called Takeout Birmingham, and they are to this day my favorite company that I've ever worked for, and are my basis for comparison for everything that I do in this line of work. Their pay scale was similar to that of Doorstep Delivery in that the base pay was $3. Doorstep at 7 miles, you got an additional $3. At Takeout at 8 miles, you got an additional $3. One thing that I didn't like from either was that you could do a delivery that was 20 miles away and there was still no extra. Doorstep did not enforce tipping in the least. They acted like they banned people, but drivers were constantly complaining about the same people over and over. And we basically just always got a runaround from one of the sides. So let's talk about the Takeout Birmingham real quick. Ben, the owner, he's such a great guy. I would work for that guy until the day I died, if I could. If ever there were a man that genuinely cares about the people that make him money and the things they do for him and all that, it's Ben. Ben really cares about his people, and he does plenty to show it. And he is more than fair. He's very understanding. I don't know if who his management team is right now. It might have changed, but his management team was great. All just genuinely nice, pleasant people to be around. And I was probably a little bit more of a jerk to them than I should have been, because they were great people. So, working for the Takeout Birmingham, if I worked 7 days a week, it was about a $500 to $700 a week job. 500 probably more common than anything. At the time, I thought that was great. Also at the time, I refused to do the math on my expenses and profits, because I was pretty confident that I was taking a loss, but I enjoyed the work and the people that I worked with so much that I just couldn't help myself. I had to keep working for the Takeout. I love those people. So then I moved to Iowa, and I went to work for Food Dudes Delivery. To date, the worst, absolute worst people that I've ever worked for. I basically worked for a franchise, and the owner of my franchise was an arrogant kid, fresh out of college. I actually think he failed college, but anyways, he was fresh out of college and, making lots of money, and just extremely arrogant guy, cocky. He made me ride with him my very first day so that he could train me, even though at that point I already had about 3 years of experience. And it was one of the most terrifying rides of my life. Complete and utter disregard for traffic law. Doing 30 to 40 over the speed limit. running stop signs constantly, cars constantly honking, constantly having to slam his brakes to prevent from hitting anyone, and yeah, it was a complete nightmare, total nightmare. I've never been so scared in a car in my life. As far as working there, it was busy at times. Their base pay, I believe, was $3 again. Um, I don't recall if we got paid extra based on distance for, I don't remember how they did that. I want to say that one was just $3 plus tips. Again, no tip enforcement. The Takeout Birmingham is the only company that I've worked for that die hard enforced tipping. You got two chances. If you stiffed a driver once, they put a note on your account. If you stiffed the driver the second time, you got banned from ever ordering again, because drivers are completely dependent on tips for income. That's one thing that I feel like I need to explain too, is that when you get into a business like this, okay, you are an independent contractor. You are 100% responsible for your expenses. That includes, fuel, insurance, taxes, all the maintenance costs on a vehicle. Basically, you're going to have to pay for everything without any help from, any type of employer or government. You're going to have to do this on your own. If you're going to get into this business, you need at least 20 miles to the gallon. More than 30 is much better. If you can get like 40 or more, that's awesome. That is amazing. Gas mileage matters in this line of work. Then GrubHub came to town. Once they entered the Des Moines market, it was a complete game changer for the amount of money that you could make in this business. At least in the size of markets that I've had to work in, which is markets of about 500,000 people. If I drive in the town I live in now, that's a population of only about 25,000. It's not really sustainable to drive in the town that I live in. If I knew that I were the only driver, I would probably do it, because you could probably make money that way. But this town is just not busy enough. So working for Food Dudes, they were terrible. They had no respect for the drivers. They would send you orders when you weren't even logged in. They didn't enforce tipping. Most companies like this don't enforce tipping. I've only worked for one, and that was the Takeout Birmingham. Tips are a big deal in this business, because most of these companies, the base pay is terrible. It's a joke in most cases. $3, $2. I've been paid less than $2 for base pay. I've had tips as high as like $50, $60. Those are rare. The great majority of the tips that you get are going to be $2 or $3. You're probably going to see a lot of fives. Anything over $5, it's going to start to become more rare. I don't get a lot of more than $10 tips. Those are, I would say, extremely rare. You got to just catch the right person at the right time to get those. But so after Food Dudes, I went to GrubHub, and all of a sudden I'm going from these companies where I'm doing good to make $500, $700 a week, to I can make like $1,000 to $1,500 a week. And the way GrubHub sets things up with their attendance requirements and order acceptance and completion requirements. Um, to me, they're bordering on having their people be employees because they basically force scheduling. Um, I don't think that independent contractors um, should be scheduled, considering we're our own boss and supposed to be able to come and go as we please. But yet there's companies like GrubHub that, they have a rating program where, like, if you're prorated, you get more deliveries and you get more access to the schedule and all this. And then, there's like 2 levels below that. And, if you're at the bottom, like, you're risking deactivation and all because you're not taking the amount of orders that they want you to, or, you happen to be 15 minutes late, or they sent you somewhere outside the delivery area and you didn't get back in time. There's just this whole laundry list of things to be deactivated for with a company like GrubHub. I ultimately lost my contract with them because I was rude to a customer. I was at a point at that time that I was really hating the industry. I was sick and tired of the amount of people that think it's okay to order food from 10 to 15 miles away and not tip. And of course, if you say something, you're being rude, you're being wrong, but nobody wants to see the fact that the real problem that's happening is that these companies do not explain to the customer the real and true, like, legal situation of how this is supposed to work. And that is that when a customer goes online and orders the food, they are contracting GrubHub or whatever the name of the company is to find, hire, employ a person for them that is willing to bring them the food. That person is the independent delivery contractor that has a contract with GrubHub. They're not explaining to these people that it's their responsibility to make sure that money paid to the person is fair. They're not explaining, that we're independent contractors. They're not telling them about how many miles, the person had to go. And let's not even talk about dead miles. Miles that you drive when you have no food in the car, okay? Because they may send you something that you're 10 miles away from the restaurant. And then you got 10 to 15 miles back to the customer, So those miles add up quick. And for them to not let people know how it works and that, they're basically responsible for making sure that we get paid a fair wage. We don't get paid a fair wage a lot of times because people don't know. They don't understand. And I'm sure there's people out there that would correct me about this. And my opinions of, how being an independent contractor works are wrong. And, oh, you signed the contract and you agreed to it. Okay, just because you sign a contract does not mean that all clauses in that contract are done in fair business practice, okay? It does not mean that the clauses are done with an honest and truthful intent, okay? There are often clauses in contracts that aren't necessarily lawful because they're trying to get you basically to give up your rights, okay? So when signing a contract or enforcing a contract, remember to keep that in mind, okay? Just because it's in a contract doesn't mean that it's lawful. It doesn't mean that it'll stick, okay? I understand that contracts typically do tend to stick because it's a written agreement between 2 people. But don't always just take it for granted that just because it's written in that contract it must be a lawful, honest thing, okay? Because I promise you, multi-million-dollar companies will try to take advantage of it. After my contract ended with GrubHub, I had already signed up at the time with UberEats and DoorDash. UberEats is by far, and not just UberEats, the Uber rideshare service too, they are by far the worst paying service of this kind that I've ever worked for. I would have to be extremely desperate to ever work for them again. They are basically selling slave wages. Um, there were deliveries I did that paid less than $2. I'm pretty sure that I had a delivery one time that paid, I think, 98 cents. I could be wrong. I don't remember what the minimums are with Uber, but it's bad. Um, they were terrible. Granted, that's in the Des Moines market. I don't know how it is in like LA, New York, places like that. I only know Des Moines market for Uber Eats. They are terrible. Please don't waste your time. Back then, DoorDash was still heavy into signing up restaurants that didn't ask for it. So there was a lot of pay with the red card, and I would go so many places that wouldn't give me the food because they didn't ask for the service. There are some places that are really adamant about not doing business with these types of companies. So that was a major headache, and DoorDash always had a very piss poor attitude towards my expenses over it. I can't even begin to count the number of times, especially in the beginning of DoorDash in Des Moines, because this was before they started having to pay out on some lawsuits that were happening to them in other states. It was terrible. I hated it. I mean, absolutely hated it. I think I drove for them about 2 weeks and got myself deactivated. I asked to be deactivated. Then I went a few months without doing any type of driving, and kind of wanted to get back into it. So I got myself reactivated with DoorDash and gave it another chance. And it was still the same old thing. But shortly after that, I found a real job. I did maintenance for about a year. Because, like I said, I hated this industry at that time. Absolutely hated it. I hated the restaurants. I hated the people. All the videos you see where they say that restaurant employees hate us, that is so true in so many cases. I dealt with that a lot in Birmingham. I've dealt with it plenty in Iowa, but I will give Iowa credit that the people in general are really nice here and are happy to see us, especially since COVID. They've been happier about us being there. I think they realized our value once people couldn't actually come inside their place to eat or to felt scared to pick up their own food. So I was all right with, the employees. The people, they're all right, but I mean, you deal with rude people everywhere you go. I once had a waitress in Iowa that got me deactivated because I called her a bitch to her face because that's exactly what she was. She didn't like that. And in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done it, but I'm the type of person that I have strong opinions sometimes, and I'm not afraid to let people know it when I do. Keeping stuff inside is not a good idea for me. When COVID hit, I effectively lost my maintenance job because they decided that they were going to stop all maintenance. So basically, I became useless. So I decided to go back to DoorDash yet again. And this time, I have been so just pleasantly surprised and pleased. With a few exceptions, there are still plenty of situations with DoorDash that you can get yourself into where you're basically going to get ripped off. You're going to lose out on money that you thought you were going to make because a customer canceled, or the restaurant can or won't fill the order, or the grocery store can or won't, fill the order, or it's not due for an hour from now. That reminds me of one thing: wishy-washiness with DoorDash customer service, driver service representatives, the ones that help us. These people are terrible to deal with because no two of them understand DoorDash policies the same. You can get told one time, oh yeah, you qualify for $5 for waiting a half hour. And then the next time you're going to get told, no, you don't qualify for $5 because you arrived early, before the pickup buy time. So you get no money for waiting time. I will say that at least DoorDash gives money for waiting time. They're the only company I've worked with that does that. As a whole, you can get some type of compensation for waiting. I got told once because I was on 2 orders and waited for an hour, I qualified for $20 of additional compensation. I went through that exact same scenario probably a week later and got told no, the policy just changed. That's something I've heard a lot too. When you deal with a rep and they tell you something's one way, and then you come across that situation again, and this time it's a different rep, and that rep's telling you that it's something, the policy is applied differently now, but you bring up the fact that no, a rep just told me that the policy was this, and they're going to say, oh, well, that policy just changed. I've heard that more times than I can count, and it's so frustrating. Also, if you're the type of person that gets frustrated having to deal with people that don't speak English as a first language, you're probably going to get frustrated dealing with the driver reps at DoorDash. I think I've had maybe 1 or 2 that I could tell that English was their first language. I was driving for DoorDash at the same time as UberEats and GrubHub. And at first, I hated it. They have the $2 minimum pay, which actually I think at that time it was still at $1, which is an absolute slap in the face. Nobody should have to drive or walk 1 inch to do something for somebody else for $2 or $1 or really even $3. That's sad. As a whole, since I've been working for DoorDash most recently, basically within the last year, since COVID began, things have been really great with DoorDash overall. My success rate with being able to walk into a restaurant, grab the food and go is probably better right now than it ever has been. I really hope that that's something that's going to continue post-COVID. I hope it's not just because of COVID. The timing is really, really good with DoorDash. But there are still the occasions where you're going to wait for 30 minutes to an hour. The money with DoorDash is not that bad this time versus last time, especially now that they've come out with DoorDash Drive. DoorDash Drive, those orders, it's easy to make 20 bucks, even 30 bucks. I ran a double for a grocery store the other day that when I accepted the order, I thought I was making $19, and at the end of the order realized that I had made $59. So DoorDash Drive is a very awesome thing, and I would seriously recommend doing it if you feel like your vehicle's big enough for it. Most of the orders aren't that big. So it's not really something to worry about as far as the size of the order. That's my 6 years in a nutshell. Basically, I worked for Doorstep Delivery, which became Iron City Delivery, and I hated them because you couldn't clear minimum wage and they had a bad attitude about it. And then I worked for the Takeout Birmingham. They were an absolutely awesome company. I really hope that Ben is still doing business in Birmingham. If he is and he's looking for drivers, hit him up. Don't waste your time on the bigger companies. Go work for Ben. I promise you won't regret it. Then we moved to Iowa and I go to work for Food Dudes. Food Dudes was semi-okay. I really just hated the owner. The money wasn't that bad. It could have been better. Um, it it was a doable company. Then I go to work for GrubHub. GrubHub overall, I would say, was amazing, simply because of the amount of money that you could make. They, in my opinion, um, opened a whole nother can of worms for me in realizing my potential when it came to what I could really do as a self-employed person. Because I'm the type of self-employed person that I would rather work 80 hours a week for myself than I had to go work 40 hours a week for Joe Schmo. I'm trying to realize my own dreams, not someone else's. Regardless of how small of a self-employment gig may be, I would take being broke and self-employed over a steady paycheck any day of the week. Um, the independence and just the freedom and all that you get to feel from being your own boss, in my opinion, is priceless. There's nothing better in the world than freedom, especially financial freedom.